Hello, students. This presentation covers Zeta Elliott's play Self-Preservation, the concepts of magical realism, and the trope of the magical Negro as they go to build the main idea of her play. So let's break down the plot. The plot of Self-Preservation has three main characters. They are Jack, Susan, and Caesar. Ask yourself which character of these three would be considered the protagonist. Remember, in our discussions, the protagonist is the character with whom the audience is meant to empathize with and whose goals we hope to succeed. Is there an antagonist? Ask yourself these questions. Next, the setting. The setting is an older house in the north that failed a landmark preservation status. Essentially, at its core, a landmark preservation means that the house is valuable as a historic piece of culture and should not be demolished or destroyed. So let's look at our major characters and their goals. Susan's major character goal is to save the house by getting landmark status, and to do this, she will re-enslave Caesar. Caesar, who is our slave character, is seeking to continue his journey to freedom. Jack decides to recognize Caesar's humanity and not appropriate his identity and eventually help him complete his journey to freedom. A quick digression. The character of Caesar is an escaped slave. This is real. In the logic of the play, Caesar really is some sort of magical slave brought into present time. We know this because the characters never question his identity. Susan believes his identity will prove the value of her home, and Caesar goes back into the wall and disappears back into whatever magical place he came. So, in order to discuss Caesar's identity as an escaped slave, this play is referencing the Underground Railroad. If you are not familiar, the Underground Railroad was a network of people and communities to help escaped slaves free the South back when slavery was legal in the United States before the Civil War. The earliest mention of the Underground Railroad came in 1831 when slave Tice Davids escaped from Kentucky into Ohio and his owner blamed an Underground Railroad. In 1839, a Washington newspaper reported an escaped slave named Jim had revealed to go north following an Underground Railroad to Boston. Now, note, this is not any form of underground transportation. Underground here means secret or hidden. And so it was a way for which escaped slaves could escape into the free North, even sometimes all the way up into Canada. Caesar is on one of these trips. As a sort of magical character, Caesar is on a trip with the Underground Railroad trying to escape slavery. That is the major thrust of his character. So, next up, we have the idea this play presents us with, which is cultural appropriation. Ask yourself, have you heard this term before? It's quite a popular term that you can see on the internet in various places. It's a tricky term, and like many terms that have become very popular, the idea of what it means can be fairly hazy, and people can use it in a bunch of ways. Academically, one of the ways we can look at cultural appropriation has been defined as the taking from a culture that is not one's own of intellectual property, cultural expressions, or artifacts, histories, and ways of knowledge. Now, there is no one-size-fits-all definition of cultural appropriation. However, I think for our class, and in terms of Zeta Elliott's play, one clear moment is that we can see when someone profits off the work of another culture without somehow giving money to that culture or giving recognition to that culture. So in this way, Susan's desire for landmark status fits the role of cultural appropriation because she is going to take Caesar and his story and use it for her own profit to keep the house. So in many ways, that is one of the first themes that we see presented in Zetta Elliott's play. We see that Caesar is Susan's plans for Caesar is to culturally appropriate him in a most physical sense by keeping his body there. We see this in a bunch of ways that Susan talks about Caesar and his value to her. Susan only wants a historic property for financial reasons. At the very beginning of the play, Susan has no desire to have the landmark status of the house help instruct people or do anything for the community. She only wants it because it will allow her to make money off of her home. She hopes the designation of a landmark status would make her a millionaire, and she only wants to keep Caesar in the house as evidence of landmark status because, as she says, they'll have to let us keep the house now. So we can see a lot of evidence of Susan wanting to keep Caesar only for her own benefit, to make money on her house, to not have to sell the house. She very much wants only to take that story and history of the Underground Railroad and the story of those black slaves who escaped that and kind of take that story and use it for her own benefit to make money on her house. So, to sum up, Susan is a clear representation of cultural appropriation as she wants to take the historic designation of the Underground Railroad solely to make money. She's not interested in preserving the history of the house. She's not concerned with the real people impacted by this history. She hopes to use Caesar solely as the proof of the house history. She wants to keep Caesar from his freedom by making him a part of her history, her story, and no mention of using the landmark status to highlight the history of the Underground Railroad. So these 5 elements that we can see of Susan's character lets us know that she has no desire to help the character of Caesar. She only wants to take his story for her own benefit and profit. Now let's move to the character of Caesar himself. Caesar as a character can be defined as a trope. A trope is a key literary term like symbol and allusion that we've studied in Elliott's plays elsewhere. The trope is in fact a phrase, word, image, or character that is a shorthand for a theme or ideas in a specific genre. So we have certain tropes that are shorthand that immediately let you know as a reader that this is a good character or a bad character, or what type of character this is, or what type of story that it is. Right? If you see a laser gun, you know that we have a sci-fi story. That's just a trope that we've seen in science fiction movies from Star Wars to Star Trek and so forth. So a trope can be a character, storyline, setting, or background that instantly lets you know what type of story or what type of character you are reading or watching. For example, in a horror movie, you will know that if a character has a flashlight in the horror movie, it will go dark and it will need like batteries and it will go out so that something will jump out at the character. That is a common trope to let you know that you are watching a horror movie. Other tropes that we see in fiction. We know that ugly characters in a lot of things will be considered bad or evil. But in other stories, non-normal characters can even have greater empathy and more human than others. So the trope can be anything that immediately lets you know what type of character or story you are dealing with. For Caesar, Caesar is a trope that we call the magical Negro. That is the technical term for this type of literary trope that we see. So, what is the trope of the magical Negro? Story, movies, or other texts that feature a magical or spiritually gifted black lead character can be referred to as magical Negroes due to the focus of their abilities towards assisting their white lead counterparts. So, one of the things that you will see in the trope of the magical Negro is that the African American character is there to teach often the white characters how to be a better human or to teach them an important lesson about racism or history. So there is a bunch of debate on the value of the magical Negro. At first glance, this seems to provide examples of black and white characters relating to each other in a constructive manner. However, closer examination of these interactions suggests a reinvention of old black stereotypes rather than authentic racial harmony. What this means is that the magical Negro trope can be seen on the surface as something that is very positive, a positive representation of African American characters. However, some critics have argued that this is a very limiting character by making these African American characters so amazing and magical and making them so special. Defines down the fact that no, African Americans are real people that have real faults and real benefits. So, to help you understand it, here are some popular images of the magical Negro trope from some films. Morgan Freeman has played this trope more than once, even playing literal God in this movie. In the Legend of Bagger Vance, Will Smith plays a magical Negro that helps a white character. And then in The Green Mile, John Coffey here is a magical character that can heal people, that teaches his white prison guards that maybe they are a tad bit racist and evil. So all three of these characters are supernaturally good characters that then impart a lesson onto a white character to make them learn and become a better person. That is the trope of the magical Negro. So let's look at how Caesar fits into this trope. Okay? So, as we know, the trope of the magical Negro, to find it out, will teach the white lead character a lesson about morality or society. This character will be selfless and almost perfectly good, a perfect person. So does Caesar fit this trope? Well, I think he does. And here's how we can look at the evidence from the play. On page 37, if you follow the dialogue of the tennis game, Caesar helps teach Jack how freedom works, how slavery would have been experienced by a slave through their back and forth of this tennis game, and Jack learning that Caesar doesn't do things for fun. Right? And so through this back and forth conversation, Jack learns that Caesar is in fact a human and in fact should be let go. So Jack learns to not be like Susan. He learns to not culturally appropriate Caesar. He learns the lesson that cultural appropriation is bad. Caesar helps Jack become a hero by amazing his wife with this act of empathy and humanity of letting Caesar go. So we can see that Caesar is a perfectly nice character, timid and shy almost to a fault, and his experience, his presence teaches Jack to be a better person and have a better understanding of cultural appropriation and the impact of slavery in America. So if we bring it all together, the central theme of self-preservation argues that we should not prioritize the monetization of history, especially African American history, because it can lead to cultural appropriation. It also has a theme that we should focus on how people can preserve the self, the individual, over preserving the standard of history or the story, right? You can kind of think how much of history is told by the Susans who have profited and made money off of history, as opposed to the Caesar or the individuals who lived that history. So Jack letting Caesar go is helping Caesar's individual story be more powerful than the official story of the landmark house. Jack's final action is amazing because this rejection of cultural appropriation, this rejection of profiting off of other people's history is so unusual throughout American history, especially on histories of America. That is our discussion of Zetta Elliott's play, Self-Preservation.